Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Fixing Diablo 2. Today we're going to be going over what's the term? Kind of like a poopy skill that nobody really uses for the most part, and that is a poison explosion. Now you might be asking, what the hell can we do to fix this skill? And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not exactly sure. Poison explosion already has a limiting factor. The main limiting factor of a poison explosion is the fact that, well, you have to have a body. Much like corpse explosion, it doesn't really work unless you actually have a body to explode. This is a huge limiting factor right off the start, and I don't really particularly like it. What it means is that to get poison explosion to use, you actually have to have a body nearby, and you actually have to explode that corpse before you can get any poison damage whatsoever from the skill, which is a very limiting factor, just like corpse explosion is a very limiting factor. And it doesn't stop there. There are other cons with this particular ability. One being that, well, it doesn't even have a very large radius. So, like, this monster right here doesn't even get hit by the poison because he's not close enough to the corpse that I exploded, basically. This is rather unfortunate because what this means is that for the most part, it's useless. And let me see if I can explain this even better in a way that makes more sense. So let's go ahead and pull up a notepad here because I love my notepads. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this for a second. So, number one, it's restricted to corpses, right? Number two, it has a relatively small range, hitting maybe like 2, maybe 3 monsters if you're lucky, right? And combining these two things together, you get problem number 3, which problem number 3 is that, well, because it has a small range and because it's restricted to corpses, you often can't hit anything, which is a pretty big issue. Number 4, and this is a very big issue with this particular skill, is that it doesn't do more damage than Poison Nova. And you might be looking at the skill and you're like, what are you talking about, Ginger? It does 58,340, and Poison Nova only does 7,871. So obviously Poison Explosion does more damage than Poison Nova, and you're a dummy. Well, that's... Well, I mean, I am a dummy, but that's neither here nor there. If you take the ability Poison Nova and you divide it out by the number of seconds that it ticks, which is 7,871, divided by 2 seconds, you get a total of 3,935.5 damage per second. Poison Explosion, on the other hand, which has a damage output of 58,340, divided by the number of seconds that it ticks, which is 16.8, does a total damage of 3,472.6 per second. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Poison Nova is higher damage than Poison Explosion, which means that there's absolutely no reason to use Poison Explosion pretty much whatsoever at all. So if you're in any given situation and you have the choice to use Poison Nova and Poison Explosion, Poison Nova is going to do the same damage that Poison Explosion does, provided that you basically hold down the button. Well, you don't necessarily have to hold down the button. Let me correct that. You just have to press it often enough that the monster doesn't stop turning green. So I know we have a green monster here, which doesn't really help. But if you poison the monster with a effect and they turn regular color again, that means they're no longer poisoned. So as long as you just basically do this, you're doing more damage than Poison Explosion would anyway. So the only advantage that Poison Explosion has over Poison Nova is duration, And the duration would basically give you the ability to poison something and then run away, and then have that poison damage take over a longer period of time. I'm not exactly sure what you could do to fix Poison Explosion. Is less damage than Poison Nova. Ironically, it is not less damage than Poison Dagger. Poison Dagger is actually less damage than both of these, which is actually really quite sad, considering Poison Nova is the single target ability. And you would usually assume that the single target ability would be the highest damage output, whereas the AoE abilities are the lowest damage output. If we use a similar example to this, let's go take a look at our girl here. So we're going to take an analog from another character, right? So we have Ice Bolt, which is our single target hit, which is made for mana cost consumption, right? It's not exactly the highest damage ability, and in fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and put in points real quick so we can really see this. So we're going to stack up points and make them as high as we can. We'll go ahead and put points into the other synergies as well. It really doesn't matter. All right, so we have all of our synergies in, and as you can see here, we got 1,590 for Glacial Spike, 3,198 from Ice Blast, and 1,285 from Ice Bolt. So Ice Bolt has a specific purpose. It is capable of low mana cost. It's 3 mana cost. It's not really in what we're talking about here, but it's an interesting thing. Ice Blast is the highest damage, but it's also not going to hit multiple targets. It's a single target ability that does the highest amount of damage. Glacial Spike has a very nice AoE effect and does not exceed the damage of Ice Blast, but Glacial Spike is much better when it comes to crowds, dishing out large damage to crowds, right? So when you choose which one of these that you're going to fire, you're going to choose them based off of those, scenarios. Are we doing damage to a large group of monsters? That would be Poison Nova, right? Poison Nova is a large group of monsters. Are we doing damage to a single target? Then you use Ice Blast. Do we need to conserve mana? Then we use Ice Bolt, and so forth and so on, right? Well, if we're looking at the Necromancer's skills, they should be very similar. So you would assume that because Poison Dagger is the single target ability that doesn't hit anything other than one monster, that it would be the highest damage of the lot. But instead of being the highest damage, it's actually the lowest damage of the lot. I guess that's because they added in the ability for physical damage to be added in, so you could do Crushing Blow and Open Wounds and stuff, but it doesn't really work that way. He's not a melee character, and it doesn't really help. Poison Nova, on the other hand, which is an AoE ability, is the highest damage of the lot, which doesn't really make much sense. Like Glacial Spike, Poison Nova should be the lower damage one, and the others should be higher. Poison Explosion, on the other hand, doesn't exceed the damage of Poison Nova, is not as good of an AoE, consumes corpses, actually has, targeting problems and all sorts of other things going on. And I really don't even know what the hell to even think about this ability other than the duration. So if we take the duration into account, what we really need to look at is, well, it's kind of nice that it has a really long duration. And how I would fix this, honestly, would be to increase the radius of the explosion, because there's no way that you're going to be able to relocate the corpses. So that's the first thing that we have to remember here, is that you can't relocate the corpses, so we're already in an issue here. So once you have the corpse on the ground, if the monsters aren't near the corpse, well, then you're already screwed, right? So increasing the distance that the effect travels would be nice. Number 2, I think making it into a more persistent effect would also help tremendously. So as you can see, it doesn't last long enough at all to be useful. It lasts for a total of what was that? 1,000, 2 1,000, 3, it's already gone. So 2.5 seconds is what it's up on the field for. And in those 2.5 seconds, you might be lucky to poison 1 or 2 monsters, right? So I would increase the size of it and also the duration that it stays on the battlefield. I would say at least 5, maybe 10 seconds would be more acceptable. I think 10 seconds would be more acceptable. On top of that, I really feel like it needs to have a long duration and not necessarily like it doesn't need to be the highest damage. If I had to choose between them, Poison Nova would be the lowest, Poison Dagger would be the highest, and this one would be somewhere in between with their own specialities. This would be a 16.8 second poison that you stab something and run away. This one is a very fast-acting poison that you're going to spam, and this one would be somewhere in the middle, like firmly in the middle between the two, that would last for a really long period of time. And make it into like a 30-second duration, or even like maybe like a 60-second duration poison. But obviously with duration, you can also change the damage, how much it's doing per tick, and it doesn't need to do more damage per tick than Poison Nova, and it doesn't need to do more damage per tick than Poison Dagger. I mean, it really just kind of depends. You can set it up how you want it and get it so that it's doing the right amount of damage per tick. But the goal here is to make it useful. Make it larger, make it last longer, and make the actual duration of the effect last longer. Now, the reason why you make it bigger is so that it actually hits something. Right now, it hits nothing. The reason why you make it last longer is, again, so that it actually hits something. If the monsters stand in the poison cloud for a prolonged period of time, it doesn't mean anything. There's nothing, it doesn't do anything if they get hit by it multiple times other than maybe refresh the duration of the poison, and that's not really going to be beneficial to you in any way. So increasing the duration of the poison cloud doesn't necessarily cause any problems. And it also adds the added benefit of not having to consume a large number of corpses. There is another con that I forgot to talk about, and I just recently remembered, is that number 5, because it uses corpses, it is competing with Corpse Explosion, Raise Skeletons, Revives. It's already in a situation where it's not exactly the best skill in the game. It doesn't do more damage than Poison Nova. It doesn't do more damage than Poison... Well, it actually does do more damage than Poison Dagger. It doesn't hit anything. It's hard to target. And in any situation, honestly, you're probably better off using Corpse Explosion. Perhaps one thing they could do is they could make the range increase with level. That could be an interesting one, to increase the range of the Poison Explosion with level. And maybe also duration can increase with level. So let's say range/duration increases with level. This would make it more useful as you level it up and actually make somebody might possibly actually want to cast it. Which would also potentially fix this. And it would also potentially fix the fact that it's restricted to corpses. Now, hear me out. If it has a relatively large range and a relatively long duration, then you might not necessarily have to spam cast it like you would Corpse Explosion, which means it wouldn't consume very many corpses. It would only consume 1 or 2 corpses during that time period. You might put like 1 over here and 1 over there to cover the battlefield in this poison cloud, right? Well, if that's the case, then you're not really going to be competing with Corpse Explosion or Raise Skeleton or Raise Skeleton Mage or Revive, etc., because you're going to more strategically use it as opposed to spamming it, right? And this way you can utilize it to arrest regeneration. It might also become very useful for even a character who is not a Poison Necromancer, just to grab it specifically for the purposes of arresting regeneration, to be able to poison everything on the battlefield for a long period of time and stop the regeneration from happening. Stopping regeneration is very important for Summon Necromancers, because as a Summon Necromancer, you don't really have any good ways to apply open wounds or prevent monster heal to the monsters. You do have poison effects, though. And if this was a relatively long duration poison, which could hit pretty much every monster on the battlefield, then it would become extremely useful to Corpse Explosion, to summon Necromancers, because it would give you a very valid way to essentially stop all regeneration of the monsters within range. I think that's pretty much it when it comes for this particular ability. There's really not a lot more to go over. It's not a very good ability. But with the right changes, it could potentially be an absolutely amazing ability. maybe even a part of the Poison Nova Necromancer's arsenal. And I think that's the really sad thing about the Poison Necromancer, is that pretty much the entire Poison Necromancer boils down to Poison Nova. And that's it. That's all you use. You use Poison Nova, and that's it. You don't use anything else. Yes, you have these abilities, stacked up. You've got Poison Explosion with 20 points in it, and you've got Poison Dagger with 20 points in it. But the only reason you have that is so that you could get your Poison Nova to its maximum ability, right? Well, if you actually had some other utility uses for the other two skills, like Poison Explosion and Poison Dagger, then they might actually see use. If Poison Dagger was the higher single target damage, it might encourage your Poison Nova Necromancers to get in a little melee range and get scrappy. If Poison Explosion covered the battlefield and had a very nice AoE type effect, kind of keeping everything poisoned all the time, again, it would be rather useful, because instead of a tiny little explosion that barely hits anything for a very short duration, which does basically nothing and essentially just wastes a corpse, it would balloon out into a large gaseous field that would poison everything that runs through it, which could be much more useful in the long run. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about the Necromancer's Poison Explosion. And as always, keep watching.